Ok,
Buonasera a tutti.
no, un attimo, non ci siamo ancora.
Ho visto Rec.
No, ho cominciato la registrazione. Ecco, prego.
Buonasera a tutti. Welcome everyone to this talk on uses of climate data in historical research, recent trends and future prospects. E grazie a tutti. Thank you everyone for being here with us. This important webinar of today is part of a fantastic series of virtual events on science and technology that are coordinated by our embassy in Washington, organized by the network of Italian consulates, institutes of cultures all around the US, together with ISSNAF, the very important Italian scientists and scholars in North America Foundation you all very much know. So I'm therefore very happy and very honored to welcome here the president, the new president of ISSNAF, Dottoressa Cinzia Zuffada, and the acting director of the Cultural Institute of New York, Paolo Barlera, and I really thank them for the work they have done for organizing this important meeting of today. And also the next meeting we'll have in December on medical issues, also in this very same framework. I also want to thank my colleague, Deputy Consul Riccardo Cursi, for all the work he did for this meeting. You have to know that this Consulate General here in Park Avenue has a very long established and excellent relationship with ISSNAF. I would really like to take this important opportunity to confirm our commitment to strengthen and expand this New York ISSNAF chapter, the support for them. I think the times are very ripe to expand the membership of ISSNAF New York, and as the Italian City Hall here in New York, we are ready to do whatever it takes to help you and to contribute to make this family of New York ISSNAF as much as enlarged as possible. Because we really believe here in this consulate in scientific diplomacy, which is not just the traditional and important Italian commitment to science, but it's really, I think, a strategic issue also for the Italian diplomatic network here in the United States to invest in this dynamic part of cooperation between Italy and the tri-state area, between Italy and New York City. Just think of what is happening during this pandemic. The flow of scientific, medical cooperation between Italy and New York City has been huge. It's still going on. And it's another example of the never-ending partnership between Italy and New York City. And also very proud tonight to have here as our special guest, one of the stars of the academic Italian sky here in New York and the tri-state area, Professor Nicola Di Cosmo, a star from Princeton University, a talented and very well-known Asian hand of the Princeton University. He is also an active and important actor of the Institute of Advanced Studies in Princeton. Just think about the fact that we are talking about the Einstein Institute. This is what the Institute of Advanced Studies is about. And we are very happy to have you here today with one of your specific focus, that is to connect historical data with climate change and to give a perspective to this very important issue which Italy, of course, is very much committed also in the big diplomatic game. So really, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And last but not least, let me thank Maria Teresa Cometto, our great moderator, our great journalist, and she's a very active and important member of the Italian press corps in the US. And let me say that also she's a special cartographer of Italian creativity, Italian innovation. Where we have Maria Teresa, we are sure to have Italian innovation, and we are really, the priority of this consulate is to find, explore, and highlight the Italian innovation in New York City, in the tri-state area. We are not just the country of big and great history, but we are also the country of future. Grazie mille, and I'm sure that tonight we'll have a new and interesting, stimulating perspective. I wish you an excellent debate, webinar, and I'm very pleased to give the floor to President Cinzia Zuffada. Grazie, grazie a tutti.
Thank you, Consul General Genuardi, for this kind introduction and for hosting today's event together with the IIC of New York. We are really honored to have the opportunity to reintroduce ISSNAF to the Italian community in New York and your consular region, and everywhere else where the audience is tuning in from. We represent the network of Italian researchers in North America, whose mission is to help connect our members across the boundaries of disciplines, to serve as a resource to our communities, highlight the accomplishments of outstanding researchers, and also help the younger generations of Italian researchers get established and be successful. New York has had a very large ISSNAF chapter, which has been very active in the past, but has been quiet recently. We hope that by sharing what some of our prominent members from this region do, we can provide an impetus for the chapter to re-energize in partnership with you, your consulate, and the IIC. Perhaps now more than ever, we need to rediscover our sense of community also through this kind of experiences of getting together. And without any further ado, it is now my privilege to introduce Maria Teresa Cometto. She is an Italian journalist based in New York since the 2000s and writes about economics, business, and technology for the leading Italian daily Corriere della Sera, and also is an author of several books and a friend of ISSNAF. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Consul General, for your nice words. Thank you, Cinzia Zuffada, for inviting me to moderate this very, very interesting discussion. I'm very honored and pleased to keep collaborating with the ISSNAF, which is a great foundation. And thank you all for joining us this evening for this discussion. As you may know from previous conversations, you can send us questions through the chat or through the question and answer application, and we will forward your questions to Professor De Cosmo at the end of the presentation. So Nicola Di Cosmo is really a great scientist. He's the Henry Luce Foundation Professor of East Asian Studies at the Institute for Advanced Study at the Princeton University. He holds a PhD from Indiana University in Uralic and Altaic Studies and BA from the University of Venezia. He has been a research fellow at Cambridge University, taught at Harvard University, and at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, and held numerous visiting or teaching positions in Japan, China, France, Italy, and the US. So, Nicola Di Cosmo, hi. How does it feel to work at the institute where Albert Einstein used to work?
Well, first of all, let me just thank everybody who has been so kind and to invite me to give this presentation, this webinar. In particular, the Consul General Genuardi, and of course the Italian Institute of Culture, and ISSNAF, which represents really an important reality of Italian scholars and scientists in North America. So thank you, Cinzia, as well. And thank you, Maria Teresa Cometto, for your interest in my research as well. Of course, it is an humbling experience to work at the Institute for Advanced Study. Let me share my screen with you and the audience here. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Very good. Thank you very much. Yes. So the Institute for Advanced Study is an amazing place. And I must say, I'm not the only Italian here. There are another 2 Italian professors. We are only 28 professors. Francesco Trivellato, who is an historian of early modern Europe, and Camillo D'Alellis, who is a mathematician. All new additions to the Institute for Advanced Study. And yes, it is famous for Einstein and Oppenheimer and von Neumann and many other people who have a global planetary reputation. But it is also a place where very important research continues to be done in various areas: mathematics, physics, social science, and historical studies. And it's a wonderful place. It's been a wonderful place for me to work because you have a total freedom to pursue your interests, to seek new directions in your research. And my involvement with science data and with climatology could not have been possible really at another place. We enjoy a wonderful, this is the Institute. You can see it's a residential place, so people come here for a year. There is a wonderful sociability, and the sociability that is also part of our environment, which is incredibly conducive to dialogue across disciplines, and therefore cross-fertilization, if you like, also with the sciences, also with the social sciences. The total freedom to pursue one's own research, one's own curiosity, if you like, has been critical to my development, let's say, as a scholar.
Yeah, and talking about collaboration among scientists in different fields, Nicola, you are a historian who uses scientific data from paleoclimatology for your research. How did you get interested in this new science? You started as a historian graduating in Lingua Orientali at Casa Foscari in Venice. And so how and when did you realize that historians and scientists can collaborate?
Let me just say that this is a development that goes back a few years, let's say almost 7 or 8 years. But in a sense, it really started with my own interest in a very particular area of Asian history or Asian studies. And this is a particular area that I'm going to explain now, because otherwise it is very difficult to actually understand why over the past 8 years I subjected myself to learning things that I would have never imagined I would need to learn for my own historical work. I'm sorry. Let me go back to my screen. I don't know if you can see it.
Yes, we can.
So my focus really is in East Asian history is not just Chinese history, but it's rather the history of people without history in East Asian and also world history. And these are pastoral nomads that exist in the steppes of Mongolia. I don't know if you visited this area of the world, but it's a very, very fascinating area. northern China, Central Asia, South Siberia. And typically, I've been interested in the Great Wall of China, of course, that in a sense divides these two worlds, the world of China from the world of the nomads. And these people, when I was in China as a student 40 years ago, I realized how important the multicultural, multilingual aspect of Chinese history actually is. And within that particular multicultural environment, the nomads played a very, very important role. They conquered China. They were a conduit of ideas of religion, Buddhism, the Silk Road, and so forth. So they played a very important role in the development of not just East Asia and China, but really Eurasia. So how did they do that? And it's very difficult to study the history of the nomads because unlike other civilizations, they left very little documentation behind. They didn't have administrations and bureaucracies and so forth. So yes, in part we have written records that were written by people who are not the nomads themselves for the most part. But we also have material culture, and I've been studying archaeology for a while. So the history of these people is naturally interdisciplinary. You have to know several languages, but you also have to have a sensitivity for material culture. And Mongolia has seen a real efflorescence and explosion of archaeological work over the past 20 years. There are amazing things that come out of the Mongolian ground, let's say. Huge tombs, very important. I mean, only a few years ago, Roman glass was excavated from or Byzantine coins. So there are really interesting developments in Mongolian archaeology. And then we have just the people, the ethnography, the oral history. And we can assume that some of the social structures, some of the economic structures that nomads had until recently are similar to those of 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. But in fact, nomadic history does change. And how does it change? This is the conundrum, let's say. This is the basic question that we are trying to figure out, not just me, but other people as well. And clearly the environment has a huge impact in this respect. The changing environment has a huge, not just impact, but also a force of transformation in the society, the economy, and the politics of these people. So when we ask, how did they create these big empires? We also need to ask, what was the weather like when they did that?
and here paleoclimatology helps, right? Can you explain to us what this new science is, what tools it uses?
Paleoclimatology really started in a long time ago with the understanding that our environment preserves knowledge about past climates. Past climates can be reconstructed in many different ways, but it's especially since probably the 1970s and the use of ice cores from Greenland that paleoclimatology has really made an enormous progress. Nowadays, of course, the recent climate is measured through mechanical instruments and technical instruments. But before then, how do we know what temperature or what kind of precipitations there was in a certain area? That information is embedded in natural features like corals, like stalagmites, like tree rings, like lake sediments, and so forth. So paleoclimatology is the science that extracts that kind of knowledge from all of these different sources, which we call proxy records that exist in nature. And of course, we have different specializations here, from paleontologists to people who study ancient plants or ice cores or tree rings. These are all very different specializations. Among these, of course, historical records are also used because people took notice of a volcanic eruption, for instance, or other events that altered climate. And this is what paleoclimatology is the study of and the understanding of past climates. Now, the problem is that climatic records and historical records, that is how a human society works and how an environment works, don't always go together because the time scales are so different. One thing is to understand what how the climate changed over centuries and millennia. And another thing is to understand how a society or a community changed, which normally is measured on a much smaller time scale, years and decades, not millennia. Also millennium perhaps, but historians usually use much smaller time scales. So what happened in paleoclimatology is that now we have actually much data with a much higher definition. So we can reconstruct ancient climates going back 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 years, year by year. Year by year. So this is the revolution that historians can take advantage of, because finally paleoclimatology and history works at similar scales.
Mm-hmm. You mean that you really can tell what weather was in, I don't know, 1345?
Yes, but only in the summer.
I see.
Because the tree rings only record summer temperatures during the growing season, which is June, July, August. So we know much better certain seasons than other seasons. But there are other ways. There is not just tree rings, of course. There are other ways to understand also winter conditions, spring conditions, and so forth. But yes, we can tell whether in the summer of 1345 rained or not.
Mm-hmm. And so now, can you tell us how did you use this data to reconstruct the history of the Mongols and to explain why they were able to invade China and also Europe? And also explain your approach to the relationship between climate changes and social changes.
Yes, I mean, one of the insights in this historical work is, as you can see in my slide here, we have been very worried, of course, with global warming and climate change, about the disappearance of glaciers, for instance. So there are many pictures of glaciers that existed 100 years ago and no longer exist today. The same can be said for longer periods of time of the environment of these nomads. So there are periods of time where the steppes are extremely fertile. Let's say there is a lot of grass and life is good. And there are times when instead life is not so good. And there is greater aridity, less water, and so forth. And these type of disasters still happen today. 20 years ago, as well as 10 years ago, in Mongolia, in Inner Mongolia, we had a huge drought, millions of animals died. And in Outer Mongolia, or the Republic of Mongolia, due to what they call Dzud, which is a winter disaster, enormous snowfalls. A lot of animals froze to death or died of hypothermia, couldn't feed themselves. And again, massive disaster. A massive disaster that forced actually the state of Mongolia, this is just a few years ago, to seek international assistance for economic relief. Many of the livestock of Mongolia perished in this disaster, and people perished actually as well. There was a famine, hunger, and so on. And this is just in our present days. So the question that a historian has to ask is what happened not 20 years ago, but 200 or 2,000 years ago. How did these people survive these events, and how did these people react in preserve their life and their property in terms of animals and so on? So these are questions that climate can help us answer by tracking the evolution of climatic conditions or the changes in climatic conditions over time. My own approach to the Mongolian history, just to come back to your question, started in, as I said, eight years ago in 2012, when I joined a group of climatologists who were doing research in this beautiful valley in central Mongolia called the Ochen Valley, the Ochen River. And they were trying to associate climate data with really the history of the Mongol Empire. And they found something very important. These are the leaders of the team. It's wonderful always to travel with people who have electric saws and so on in their luggage. But here is the result. It's very easy to see. I mean, I can explain very easily that if you look at this diagram, the Mongolia experienced 27 years of good weather. By good weather, we mean warm weather with a lot of rain that increased the productivity and the fertility of the steppes. And during the same time, this is again central Mongolia, and these arrows are the expedition of Genghis Khan all over Asia in practice. Northern China, Eastern China, Central Asia, Russia, over the same period of 25, essentially 25, 26, 15, 16 years, from 1210 to 1227. So in a relatively short period of time, there was an explosion of Mongolian military activity all over China, which of course created the foundation for the later formation of the Mongol Empire across Eurasia. And therefore, what we discovered was that the Mongols did not leave Mongolia because of bad conditions, but because of good conditions. It was the supply of food, horses, and so on that in some ways fed the military machine of the Mongols that was created by Genghis Khan at that time. Reversing, in other words, a long-standing theory that assumed that the Mongols left Mongolia because their environment had become depleted. Instead, it's just the opposite. It was a rich and florid environment that pushed the Mongols out of Mongolia.
Yeah. Well, I know that talking about the Mongols, that you are writing a book about Venice and the Mongols. Can you anticipate some of the results of your research that you are going to present in this book?
First of all, I'm not writing it by myself. I'm writing it with another Italian scholar. We are putting together our knowledge, our different specialization. I work more on the Mongols. Lorenzo Publici, works more on the Russian side and the European side of things. And yes, the 14th century was, in the 13th century with the Mongol conquest, were phenomenal years in terms of the expansion of trade routes. Trade routes, let's imagine the Silk Road. Here I have a map that goes all the way from China to the Caspian Sea, to the Black Sea, to the Mediterranean. This is an overland route. And on the Black Sea, essentially this overland route joins the sea routes of the Mediterranean and both European and North African ports. So what the Venetians and the Genoese did was to create commercial colonies on the Black Sea in the Crimea. Caffa was the Genoese colony, the most important Genoese colony, and Tana was the most important Venetian colony there. And they connected the European markets with the Mongol markets, and the Mongols were very important in this. So in this book, we are trying to, this is a very well-known story, but in the book, we are trying to emphasize the role of the Mongols in reducing risk. They were protecting this trade, they were protecting Italian merchants, and so they were reducing risk, and they were also favoring trade in many other ways, providing interpreters, providing transportation, logistical support, and laws and rules. This is the time also when Italian merchants go to China, go to India, go to Iran. Of course, in Tabriz, there was a very large community of Genoese, especially Genoese, but also Venetian merchants. So there is really an irradiation of Italian merchants all over Asia, thanks to the support, interest in trade provided by the Mongols. So basically, this is our, and even today, we can see the amazing fortresses built by Genoese, especially in Crimea. Today, Kaffa is Feodosia or Sudak. So it is an amazing story that we are trying to tell, not just from the European point of view, but also from the Mongol point of view.
Mm-hmm. Well, it looks like it is a kind of a sort of early globalization, but it is connected also, if I well understand, to the spread of the death plague in those days.
It is certainly an early globalization, absolutely. And this is probably the first true globalization in world history. All of these different, of course, there is also a maritime route through India and the Arabian Peninsula and Iraq. They are all connected together. But with this increased connectivity, they are also dangerous in some ways. That there's not just trade, but there are also pathogens that are transmitted together with people and objects and merchandise. So yes, this is also an extraordinary new field of research in some ways. There is a lot of new research thanks to the development of paleoepidemiology, for instance, and developments in the field of DNA and biology, where all the different strains of the bacillus of the Black Death, which is Yersinia pestis, have been tracked back to the Neolithic. So we have a much better map, let's say, and a much better understanding of the development of this bacillus, which of course spread according to the traditional story, which is now being contested, however, spread from this one point of origin in Crimea, the siege of Kaffa, the Genoese trading post and fortified town in the Crimea, by the Mongols. The Mongol army was probably infected with Black Death. It was transmitted to people in town, and these people fleeing for Kaffa for Europe brought with them on the ships sick people, as well as probably rats and fleas that spread the Black Death throughout Europe. Why, I mean, we know already from the conquest, so-called conquest of the Americas, so-called conquest in quotation mark, I would say, by the Spaniards, that together with the Europeans, a number of diseases also came to South America and Central America that decimated the local population. So more contacts also means danger that these epidemics can spread very quickly. The question is, of course, in terms of my own interest, did climate play a role? This we don't know yet, actually. It's unclear. But if we consider the fact that the Mongols arrived in Russia and Europe, and by the way, they reached the coast of Dalmatia, of Yugoslavia, they reached the Adriatic Sea, so they came very close to Venice, actually. Already in the 13th century, but the plague, of course, spread only in the mid-14th century, there is 100 years lag between these two events. The Mongols did not bring the Black Death with them, but it developed later. So we need to understand whether there is a climate issue here at play or not, with changing climate, maybe that favored the spread of the disease, or whether there were other reasons. And current research tends to favor a theory of multiple foci, multiple areas from where the Black Death actually spread at certain times. So not a single point of origin, but different points of origin. We have to understand better but there were already in the 12th century, in the 13th century, with the first wave of the Mongol conquest, actually already some episodes that seem to indicate an early spread of the plague, which then exploded in the 1347-48.
Yes. Nicola, you explained to us that your research demonstrates that the previous interpretation of the Mongol Empire was wrong. Are there other historic events that can be understood in a different way compared to traditional theories? Are you working on other issues?
I'm working on several other issues, but I should say also that I'm not the only one to, I mean, this is really a fertile field of research, and lots of people have been looking at climate data, and there is a theory for the fall, collapse of the Neo-Assyrian Empire in the first millennium BCE. There is a new theory, a new book on the role of climate in the fall of Rome. There are issues with Egyptian history and the role of volcanic eruptions in the decline, at least, of the Ptolemaic Egypt. In other words, we have several effects, let's say, in historical studies, and especially for the ancient history, that several theories that are changing as we understand better the role of climate on these societies. We have to understand that earlier societies are more vulnerable to environmental changes than we are. So this vulnerability can only be assessed really in terms of the kind of challenges that they faced as their climate was subject to fluctuations. So in my own research, I'm very happy to have been part of a team that discovered a very interesting period in the first millennium, AD in this case, where the temperature really reached some of the lowest levels ever in history. So we call this the late antique, little ice age. It's a little bit over 100 years, but many things happened during this 100 years. Throughout Eurasia. This is another interesting aspect of looking at climate, that we don't look at one region or one nation, one country. We look very broadly at the effect of this climate change across a very large territory, usually either Europe and North Africa or Eurasia. And we see that there are migrations, for instance, there are migrations from Central Asia, the Avars come into, and the Turks, of course, come into Europe, and also the Justinianic plague. I mean, going back to the question of plague, of course, there is another big plague in the 6th century, which devastates and decimates the population. So all of these correlations, let's say, may not give us a definite answer, of course, but it is very important to bring climate into the analysis, into our consciousness, let's say, as historians, and understand that a very, very cold weather over a long period of time, or very dry weather, or very wet weather, does change the way in which human systems work, societies and communities, and that these people have to do something to react to these type of changes. Like today, we need to have in our own consciousness, of course, the need to perceive the vulnerability of our own societies when confronted with massive massive phenomena such as global warming or climate change on a planetary scale. So these are the interesting things, the interesting new directions of research. Of course, for this particular period of time, I'm interested in wide trans-Eurasian migrations in which these nomadic people, of course, were very much a protagonist.
Yeah. Can you, Nicola, elaborate how all this new data can help us to face the problems of climate change today, and what our policy should be?
I think what history can do is put things in perspective. Put things in perspective and make sure that when we say that in order to confront future challenges, we have to be aware of the past and past challenges, and that history should lead us to a better understanding of the kind of challenges that other past societies had to face, and the consequences that come when we ignore, the problems that we are facing. So there is a lot of research these days about the questions of vulnerability and adaptive capacity and resilience of societies confronted with really life-changing climatic events. And we can think about the Californian drought, for instance, or a number of other. I mean, water is a very big issue also in the world diplomacy and conflicts. So in some cases, we can say that history presents a variety of cases that we can use today as possible precedents that we can study in order to understand whether this type of climatic changes may bring may lead to conflicts or migrations, or of course other political changes. And I think that if we have to use precedents from history, these precedents have to be precise, have to be clear, have to be honest. So without having the climate information and without interpreting the climatic changes in light also of social, economic, and political changes, our precedents, let's say, our knowledge base is not going to be very helpful as we face the challenges of the present in the future. I think history is typically based on archaeology, text, documents, but today we also have scientific means to understand much better how our ancestors reacted to climatic changes and how societies collapsed, or how people could no longer live in one place, had to migrate to another place. All of these historical instances need to be studied very carefully, if nothing else, to bring to the consciousness of our contemporary leaders, if nothing else, an understanding of, I don't think this is possible, but nevertheless, an understanding of the real impact of climate and in altering our relationship with the environment. And once we alter our relationship with the environment, we alter everything. We alter the way in which we use resources, we alter the way in which we organize ourselves, we alter the economy, and so forth. We, of course, live in a very different world. It's much more interconnected, interdependent, and so forth. But communities are still communities and societies are still societies. So I think history has the capacity of just shedding some light, a better light on the connection between the ecology, the environment in which we live, and how we use our resources, and what kind of consequences overuse of resources or other forms of let's say, negative interaction with the environment can lead to. I don't know if it's clear, but.
Right, it's very, I think, very complex and not an easy, I mean, way of one explanation for everything, right?
No, you're absolutely right. But it is important, I think, at the very least, to understand that our work is also in a very preliminary phase. We still have to build connections across disciplines, which is really, really important. So another aspect of this work is really to build bridges across disciplines. Scientists and historians don't communicate very easily. They think in different ways. They have different objectives. Whenever I have to publish in a scientific journal, it's a huge headache because I don't know how to reduce my argument to 3,000 words and so forth. So there is also a very important aspect of really developing a new language with which scientists and historians and so on can communicate with each other. And that is perhaps an even more important aspect of this work, as we have to learn from scientists, of course, but scientists also have to learn from us, because otherwise the human dimension of their work is lost in some ways, or is diminished.
Yeah, and how has the global scientific community reacted to your discoveries?
for a short time rather well, in the sense that I was the first one to be very surprised. This is a reaction to this article about the early period of the Mongol expansion. And there is also another article, this one, which was an article on the withdrawal of the Mongols when the Mongols withdrew from Hungary. This is another study in which we claimed, by studying climate, that the Mongols left Europe, left Hungary in 1242 because extensive rain and overabundance of water in the system have expanded the marshes and the swamps, and the Mongols could no longer operate with their army in that kind of environment. So these are answers to long-standing questions, you know, fundamental questions. Why the Mongols left Europe? Why the Mongol Empire arose? These have been there forever. So offering a new answer, a new hypothesis to such questions, clearly somehow generated an interest. But I think the interest was also generated by the fact that we were using scientific data. And the scientific data really, really helped to find something that was genuinely new. Had nothing to do with past theories, nothing to do with documents. It was just based on, in my view, a very sound combination of historical and scientific data. So we can produce new knowledge, and this new knowledge is received well by the international community for a short period of time, because of course the news cycle is very short here. There are new scientific discoveries and new, but in terms of how long our new hypothesis will stay there, I think will stay for a very long time. I mean, it has really changed in a fundamental way our knowledge of two important events, important in both European history but also world history. And that has been, this was for me a big surprise, because of course whenever historians write something about the past, there is no reaction. But if science is involved, then there is a reaction, there is a heightened interest. And of course climate is in everybody's consciousness. So I think that was also a reason why many different newspapers and journals were intrigued.
Yeah, well, I again invite our audience to send the questions through the question and answer application or in the chat room. In the meantime, Nicola, how many other historians use paleoclimatology like you? And are there any in Italy? Do you collaborate with Italian institutions on these topics?
Most of my collaborators are in Germany, England, or the United States. In Italy, there are many climatologists, excellent climatologists. So we do have an important scientific community in this area. But unfortunately, there is not a lot of communication between historians and climatologists, as far as I can tell. This is something that I was mentioning before. I mean, the pioneering efforts in some ways of both sides, of climatologists and historians, to build bridges and to create also a research environment that favors this communication across very different and very different fields in which, for instance, if we understand certain things in evolution, progress, change, these are all concepts that historians use in one way and scientists use in a very different way. So we have to find a common language. And that is perhaps the most difficult, one of the most difficult things. But in Italy, I'm hoping to begin a collaboration with the University of Venice. We already have been talking about this, and the possible collaboration is a three-way study of an area in Central Asia, and so it's archaeologists, climatologists, and historians. We hope, of course, we could not start this research this year because of the conditions that we all live in, but certainly we hope to make some progress in the future. It will all depend on when we can travel again.
Mm. Yeah, well, waiting for some questions from the audience. I have another one of
Please.
my own. So today the concern regards the impact of human activity on climate. So how humans can contribute to climate change. But what about the past? What about the Mongols, for example, or other historic periods that you studied? The people those days just had to react to climate change, or they were also, you know, making an impact on climate change?
They certainly made an impact on the environment. So this is the interesting aspect of the past, that we didn't know how much the environment changed because of human activity or because of a natural evolution of climate. Thank you for that question, actually, because I just studied another aspect of the Mongol conquest, and that was in Central Asia. Now, and I discovered something I didn't know before. You know, we know that the Aral Sea in Central Asia is now very much depleted. And that was caused. I mean, it's almost desiccated. It's almost disappeared, and that was caused by human activity, by the overuse of water from the affluents to the Aral Sea. During the Russian conquest in the first place, and then especially during the Soviet period in Uzbekistan. So cotton cultivation in particular required lots of water, and they took too much water. And then eventually there was very little water flowing into the Aral Sea, but also global warming, also there was more evaporation and so on. Now, I discovered that during the 13th century, the Aral Sea was just in as bad a shape as it is today. And according to some theory, it was because the Mongols had destroyed the canals and the dams and so on, the whole hydraulic system of Central Asia, which was very delicate. And that disruption had caused, again, so it was, again, human activity. But in fact, the Mongols were not responsible for that. I'm not trying to defend the Mongols at all costs, but the Mongols did a lot of terrible things, but not that one. So studying climate, we find that particular period called the medieval warm period or climate anomaly was especially warm. And after 200 years of increased aridity, the level of rivers and lakes had become very low. So at that time, now there is actually an archaeological excavation, because with the water going down, finally that revealed the existence of settlements. at the bottom of the Aral Sea that went back to the 12th, 13th century. And so that's why we know that the Mongols were not responsible for that, but was actually a natural cause. So reconstructing climate can help us better understand what is actually human causes and what is natural causes. Because of course, true, I mean, there's an anthropogenic impact on the Earth system, of course. This is what we mean by the Anthropocene and the climate change and global warming and so on. But there are also natural aspects of climate. If we don't understand how climate works, and how the environment reacts in particular to climatic changes, then it's more difficult to understand what is anthropogenic and what is not.
Yeah, this is, I think, crucial, very, very important.
Crucial, absolutely crucial, yes.
We have a question. Besides using tree rings, what other methods did you rely upon for your research of Mongolian migrations?
Mongolian migration, or let's say nomadic, pastoral nomads, more generally, because Mongols conquered rather than migrated in a sense. But there is a long history of migrations, of course. There is there are now geneticists. Actually, it's a different science. Migration is probably more connected with a different science, and that is paleogenetics, or the study of ancient DNA. This is one of, there was a great Italian scientist, Cavalli Sforza, who was one of the pioneers in genetic studies in the 80s and 90s, and together with archaeologists and linguists, they studied migrations. And first of all, the most important was, of course, the migration of the Indo-European people who came and populated Europe. So the theory was that if you could put together genetic clusters with linguistic clusters and with cultural clusters, you know, from archaeology, you could trace the migration of people over time. So people who spoke the same language, who had the same culture, who have the same genes, were a people, right? And they may be differentiated from people with different cultures. So putting together all of these elements, let's say, could allow us to trace the migration of these Indo-European peoples. Now, when it comes to Mongolia, we can perhaps try to do the same. And people have looked at the Huns in Hungary, of course, and who invaded the Roman Empire and so on, Attila and the others, as migrants from Mongolia. So there is some research going on based on genetic studies that tries to trace back these Huns or other Asian peoples who arrived in Europe in the 4th, 5th century, Avars as well, based on the genetic so-called haplogroup, on the genetic belonging. So climate is one aspect. There is a whole theory that large droughts pushed people into migrate from Mongolia and other Central Asian regions to the West. But there is also a way, so how do we find out who these people were, I mean, and where did they come from? It's very difficult to use climatic data for this. But maybe putting together climatic data and genetic data and archaeological or cultural remains, and as well as perhaps linguistic data, then we can get a better idea of the migration of these people. That requires a more interdisciplinary effort. In other words, it goes beyond climate.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. A question from Mr. Marcello Romano. I was surprised by the good weather connection to the Mongols' expansion. This fact seems to be contradicting the connection between climate worsening and conflict, which we are fearing today. Could you please comment on this point?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Marcello, for that very interesting question. And this is why I think our research is important. Exactly because it contradicts assumptions that we make today. Now, the question is really the context, the environmental and historical context in which we are, about which we are discussing. Of course, there are some areas in which scarcity of water may lead to conflict. So we are really talking about agricultural areas in most cases that consume a lot of water and that require water. And I wouldn't be surprised, for instance, if water needs came into disputes, border disputes between China and India, for instance, because the Himalayas, of course, is the source of major riverways that feed a very large amount of agricultural production. But we are talking actually about a different environment. The Mongolian environment is semi-arid grassland. Semi-arid grassland, of course, it can go through periods of low productivity and high productivity. And the question is, how do you build an empire? With low productivity or with high productivity? So having found that actually the weather in Mongolia was very favorable for high productivity, and therefore more grass, low animal mortality, more horses, a steady supply of horses. We have to think about the Mongol army. Every warrior needed 5, 6, 7 horses. So we are talking about hundreds of thousands of horses involved in these expansion or invasions or conquests. So you need the resources. The horse is the main resource for the Mongol army, and the horse needs grass, and therefore having more grass and a warm weather means that you have an overproduction of horses actually that can be used for military purposes over a long period of time. So that is why we came to that hypothesis, because that particular society and that particular environment, we have more water in the system actually feeds the military needs of this particular. Now, I'm not going to get into the other problem, and that is why would the Mongols need to leave Mongolia and conquer China? And the reason, the reason for that is actually has to do with the political system and the need to support a centralized political system within Mongolia, which is another problem, let's say. But unless we look really at the specific context that we are examining, and not just the environment, but also the society and what people do with their resources, then we cannot really understand the true impact of these climatic fluctuations in both history and in the present.
Mm. Well, indeed, Nicola, politics plays a big role. I mean, because if they were pacifists, they could have raised better herds, better cattle, and enjoy peacefully the grass and live there, or not.
Well, yes. I mean, we need to understand that when Genghis Khan became Khan, I mean, it was after 30 years of civil war. So the Mongolian society had been depleted, almost destroyed. They certainly needed a unified government, and this unified government rely heavily on a 30-year-long militarization of Mongol society. It's gone through a very long period in which everybody was at war, you know, and there were too many soldiers. And so it was really a very militaristic society by that time. So how do you keep a government prevent the fragmentation of that fragile unity that finally the Mongols managed to achieve? How do you keep it going? You keep it going with with money, essentially. Where do you get the money? So a tribute was Genghis Khan and the Mongols invaded China to ask for money, essentially, in the form of tribute, and invaded Central Asia because they wanted to control the trade routes, and so on and so forth. So there is a reason, a political reason, as you say, why. But could have they done that with fewer horses or with a poor environment? I've studied also, you know, bad weather, what bad weather does, and how a Mongol type empire actually collapses. We did a study of a connection between a volcanic eruption and therefore usually bad weather, you know, colder weather, rainier weather, on Mongolia, and how that destroyed most of the livestock. People, there was a famine, and people died, and the whole political structure collapsed. So there is also another side to the story.
Yeah, great. Another question again about the Mongols. Did the Mongols influence the fall of Rome?
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm sorry, I was trying to find, yes. Well, people from, let's talk about people from Mongolia. The Mongols didn't exist until the 8th, 9th, 10th century, perhaps, as Mongols. I mean, the name didn't exist. So the fall of Rome, we are talking about really the barbarian invasions. We are talking about large migrations of people from Central Asia, and we are really talking about the Huns. This, as I was saying before, I mean, these people coming allegedly from Mongolia, but we really don't know where they came from. They could have come for over a long period of time through Central Asia, or they could have come suddenly from the Siberia and Mongolia and other areas like today's Kazakhstan, probably. But certainly there is a theory that the Huns had a huge impact on the fall of Rome. They destroyed the military defenses of the empire. I mean, put a huge strain on the resources of the empire. But the question is, why did they migrate in the first place? I mean, once again, we are always fascinated by the big impact, you know, but what we see at the end of a process, the fall of Rome. I'm interested really in the beginning of this process and in reconstructing this process. So if the Huns had an impact, as they probably did in the fall of Rome, then why? Where did they come from? You know, what were the reasons behind this movement of peoples and resources across a huge territory? So I'm fascinating really by the aspects of their history that have no simple solution, because we don't have a document about the Huns. We don't even know what language they spoke. So we know so little. And so how can we know more? And we can know more, I think, only by looking at whatever evidence, wherever we can find it. Of course, archaeological evidence is very, very important in this. And we have some evidence that some Huns actually were familiar with objects that are also found in the Altai region of Kazakhstan and Mongolia. So there are theories, let's say there are competing theories about the migration of the Huns. But yes, many people, many historians of the Roman Empire do think that the Huns and these people from Mongolia had a huge impact on the collapse of the Roman Empire.
Thank you so much, Nicola. I think that we have covered so much history, and I don't see any other questions. I think that I mean, the main point you made is the importance of collaboration among scientists, historians, specialists in so many different fields. And so I hope that this inspires maybe more young scientists to follow your example and to approach with an open mind such important problems. I see many people from the audience that who thank you. I thank all the panelists, the Consul General again, Cinzia Zuffada and the ISSNAF, Paolo Barlera with the Italian Cultural Institute. Thank you so much, Nicola. It was really fascinating and we learned a lot.
Thank you very, very much, everybody, for your patience and listening to these points. Let's hope we can make more progress. And thank ISSNAF and the Italian consulate and you especially, Maria Teresa, for your very, very kind questions. And
thank you. Goodbye, everybody. See you soon. Bye bye.